I have a collective 600 hours in both God of War 4 and 5, was in a game design club back when I was in high school, and know how to say precisely one word in Old Norse, so one could say I know what I'm talking about. I mean, I wouldn't, but that's up to you, I guess. A bit of the basic mechanics of gameplay include a typical health bar, you take damage, it goes down, we all know how it works, and a rage bar. Something similar to the rage bar exists in most combat-centric games. Throughout combat, hitting enemies gradually fills up the bar until a certain threshold is reached, and then, both of these can be filled up with crystals found around the environment. To defend yourself, you have 2, 3, 4, 5 weapons, plus you have all of these relics, so I don't know. You have 3 weapons with runic attack, so I'm just going to go over those. The Blades of Chaos are the best at close range. They have the highest melee damage and biggest area coverage with basic attacks, allowing you to hit a bunch of enemies at once, even those behind you. The Leviathan Axe is the most versatile, being useful at both close range and far range while being able to deal with multiple enemies fairly well. The Draupnir Spear is excellent at range and against single targets, being able to pelt enemies from afar, then occupy them with exploding spearheads while you follow up with a flurry of attacks. Interestingly, strengthening Draupnir's Wail lengthens the time between each explosion, which then lengthens the time an enemy can be stunned by the attack rather than just doing more damage. I learned while making this video that the runic attacks of each weapon also follow the properties I listed. The blades only have one ranged runic attack, the rest are all melee, hit a bunch of enemies, and reward being close. They even nerfed Meteoric Slam to follow these properties more closely. Draupnir is the opposite, having only 2 melee runic attacks, one of which is a charge that you can deploy from a far distance, so I don't really know if it counts. And the axe just kinda does whatever it wants. We actually get introduced to Draupnir in this game. The other 2 weapons have appeared in older games in the series. An old trick game designers sometimes like to pull is to create an object within the environment to get you used to a new mechanic or to really show off what it can do in the right circumstance. Sometimes this is done with an artificial weakness and not something that is actually built into the gameplay. A perfect example of what I'm talking about is, you, actually. The Phantom is an interesting enemy, as it's the only one that doesn't take damage, at least not in the typical sense. Once this bar fills up, the Phantom exits the battle and you have an opportunity to destroy these pillars, which is the creature's actual health bar. This enemy is moderately challenging when first encountered. Farther into the game you will meet another Phantom, but this time you will have access to the Draupnir Spear, making this fight a total breeze. There are spaces during the fight for you to stun the Phantom. The easiest way to do this is by using Draupnir's Wail. It outmatches every technique by speed, complexity of button inputs, and has the added bonus of being able to supplant a spear at any time beforehand. All of this making it significantly easier to time. Once the Phantom is gone and the pillars are unveiled, Draupnir can take these out incredibly fast, a maximum of 3 pillars torn down in a single stretch with no special equipment or skills, while previous to Draupnir, you would be lucky if you managed to damage a second pillar at all. Because of this, Draupnir is not extremely effective when fighting a Phantom because of an introduction of a weakness built into the enemy. It is extremely effective because the mechanics inherent in the design create opportunities for the strength of the weapon to shine. I'm pausing because that is one of the best things someone can say about your game. Anyway, the gap between when you get Draupnir and when you fight your second Phantom is rather large, and that's important because by that time you want to make sure the player is experienced in using the spear, has multiple runic attacks, and has dumped a reasonable amount of XP into the weapon, lest they fall back onto other weapons too often and not realizing their true strength. This fight before and after you get Draupnir is valuable because it gives contrast between how strong you were then versus now, which makes the player feel good about themselves and lets them know that how much they improved. Speaking of making players feel good about themselves, when making a mechanic with RNG, there is one rule you have to follow very carefully. Put the player in control. If a player has something bad happen to them that was based in RNG, it's going to make them feel bad unless they were in control of that effect being there. If they don't like a positive effect more than a negative effect attached to a hypothetical object, they can always just get rid of it and try a different strategy. This rule does not always have to be followed to its full capacity. Partial control can also be pulled off well. Fun fact, the ignoring of this rule won't always lead to players feeling bad, but instead give them a gambling addiction. This game follows this rule perfectly. Any RNG at all comes from buffs that you can fully customize with pommels, armor sets, and enchantments. Even some pieces of equipment increase the luck stat, which upgrades the likelihood of buffs occurring in the first place. Though, as a general rule, I'd say put as little RNG in your game as possible. It can lead to epic moments here and there, but overall the consistency will leave the player feeling like their skill is the problem, which generally makes them way more persistent. Back in 2018, when you hit enemies with your axe, it would build up a permafrost stat. If you hadn't attacked anyone in a while, or you got hit, this stat would decrease. When you got the Blades of Chaos, they had an individual immolation stat. It worked the same way permafrost did, but it was basically impossible to sustain both permafrost and immolation at once, which meant you were incentivized not to switch between weapons often, which led to less overall runic attacks being used and less overall damage. These two mechanics are directly opposed to each other, and it's the one thing about last game's combat that I would say is outright bad. In this game, there is no way they could have used the same system, as you have another pair of runic attacks you can fire off. So they fixed this system with the most obvious change. Just link the elemental charging systems together. On gaining full permafrost, you also gain full immolation and full maelstrom. If all the bars are just the same bar, it solves all the problems with the system without sacrificing any of the positives. When you switch weapons, you keep the elemental charge, which means you can string together attacks involving all of the weapons while also building up the charge. And you can fire off as many runic attacks as you want. There is actually a new feature they added to elemental charging. Once you have the bar filled up all the way, you can activate a mode that costs all of your charge buildup, which increases the damage, range, and speed of all of your attacks for a short time. This mode is not transferable across weapons, though, which makes you have to judge which is best for the current situation.